Hello and welcome to this episode. I am super excited. I'm sparkly and lit up because today we are discussing one of my favorite things, which is connecting with our beautiful stones. I'm joined today by the Covina stone educator, Liz Westlake, who also runs Materia Magikeia, which is a great place where you can purchase stones and other Hecatean witch supplies. And also by my absolute fave stone author, Nicholas Pearson. So Nicholas has been immersed in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for nearly 30 years. As one of the leading voices in crystal healing today, he offers a unique blend of science and spirituality alongside a grounded, practical approach to working with crystals. So you have a brand new book coming out March the 7th. We're recording this on the 1st of March. Crystal Basics, the Pocket Encyclopedia with over 400 gemstones in it. So we'll be talking about that. And as well, you've written many books about stones, including my favorite, Stones of the Goddess. And you've also written about flower essences. And they are certainly one of my favorite things. I always have flower essences in the kitchen, up here in my office, in my bedroom, in the bathroom. So we love that book as well. And you've also written about Reiki. And so I'm really, really excited to be talking with you today. So, for witches, if you're watching or listening, this is the point in the episode when we ask you to get your candle so we can connect with each other. So let's light our candles and do our simple ritual with that counterclockwise left-handed motion for cleansing the space, banishing, removing barriers. And if you've got an intention here, you can just add that as you're casting that counterclockwise circle. And then we bring it on in by casting the clockwise circle around us, protecting us, and connecting us to each other, and of course, to our fabulous stones and crystals and plain old rocks that we love. And our invocation for today is just a blessing of honoring the stones and crystals. So just take a moment here to pause and hold any of your favorites in your mind. You might want to collect them. I know the three of us have a bunch all around us today. So you might even want to put a pause in the podcast for a moment and go grab some of your best stone friends and allies to circle around you as we go into this conversation today. So stones are such an important part of my teaching and writing, and I have included them in all of my books in different ways. Nicholas was so kind as to provide an endorsement for my newest book, Entering Hecate's Cave. And Liz can attest to how much I contemplated actually including 13 monographs, detailed monographs on the stones in this book as an appendix in this book. And my conclusion was that, well, Nicholas Pearson already wrote the monographs for them, and I can't do better than how he wrote them. So thanks again, Nicholas, for joining us. And we're super excited about your new book, 450 monographs. Like I said when we were talking before we turned on the recording, when I saw the title, I was like, is that a mistake? So maybe we can start there because I know you've got your new book coming out and I know everyone will be curious about it. So 450 monographs. And what else do you have in this awesome pocket encyclopedia?
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me on the show today. The Pocket Encyclopedia was born out of, we'll say, observation. I noticed what really worked for the big crystal basics, the original, and also what the feedback on its generous size was. It wasn't very portable. And, there were limitations to the number of stones I could include while still having that really meaty textbooky kind of section. So I thought, well, what if we just extracted those profiles, condensed them, consolidated them, took out extraneous words, which means for the first time in my life, I wrote a book that was mostly not complete sentences. That was a strange exercise for me. And then I got to put more than double the amount in. So the book opens with 4 relatively short intro chapters that are just really the fundamentals of working with crystals, getting to know their energy, looking at how their energy corresponds to the elements, the planets, the signs of the zodiac, the chakras, how the geological correspondences like formation process and crystal system might matter. Some quick start guides to help you just begin your practice with cleansing and choosing and programming and making grids and other things. So it's a good sampler, a good overview of what's in there, but definitely the majority of the book is that section that goes through 450 crystals alphabetically, and you'll find a few charts and tables in the back as well for quick reference, just to make it nice and easy.
That's so helpful. I know, like I already mentioned to you that I'll be keeping it in my vehicle because I often go out looking for rocks, and it'll be really lovely just to have something that dense with information right in the car with me. So I'm super excited from a practical perspective that it's something that it's small enough that we can just put in our vehicle, put in our bag, and just take with us wherever we go. So it's going to be a really great reference. So thank you for that offering. I also asked Liz and Nicholas to offer us one of their personal touchstones. So it's hard to choose one. And Nicholas, you've done profiles for 450. I don't know how you could ever choose one. I love rhodochrosite, and so I just grabbed this little pillar. It's my favorite. My room, when I redecorated my room a few years ago, I said I wanted it to look like rhodochrosite. So my room looks like rhodochrosite writ large. I just love it. It's strength, it's compassion. I tend to be very Queen of Swordsy. And for me, it's a really complementary stone. It's not necessarily traits I naturally possess, given that I have so much Gemini and Scorpio energy in my chart. So I really like rhodochrosite as a buddy. These are things I might not naturally have, but as my helpmate, you can help me. You can encourage me to strengthen those things. So I love rhodochrosite. Nicholas, did you choose a touchstone to offer us?
Oh, there are so many. Right now, like in this phase of my life, it's probably emerald. But we
Mm.
were chatting earlier about how initiatory obsidian was. So I have each of those with me as a touchstone. And I became a writer thanks to an aha moment with obsidian. So it will remain with me. The very first chapter of my very first book, The 7 Archetypal Stones, is devoted to this wonderful igneous rock and its ability to stand at that threshold of material space. It is on the one hand a solid object you can reach out and hold, but on the other, if we look at the arrangement of what it's made out of, it's really a super cooled liquid. It is non-crystalline, but also sometimes microcrystalline. If we zoom in close enough, a few molecules resemble a crystal until we zoom out and see they don't connect to anything else. So it's got this one foot in this world and the other in that void of potential, that void of becoming. So because of that, it's been a really important ally for getting the ball rolling in a lot of different ways in my life.
Oh, I love that. Hail obsidian.
Hail obsidian.
What do I have for obsidian on here? I have this little fella. And then behind me, I have my obsidian sphere, which you may not be able to see in the shot, but I love obsidian. I have a really juicy obsidian story too. Way back in the day when I was still living in the city and really contemplating making some big life changes, I was out for a run in my suburban neighborhood, and this is a true story. This is a true story. Running on a dead end street, like when you're in those big subdivisions, and they cut through, there's paths to one dead end street to the other. Running down that street, and on the sidewalk, Nicholas, was a piece of obsidian bigger than the one you just showed.
That's amazing.
It was so amazing. And it really, like, I was going through a divorce and, all the big life changes that were happening. And that rock was like a personal, like really a personal ally, not just for me, but for my sons as well. And it became very central to our family. And when I thought that it had finished its work with us, I gave it to someone else. I often give stones away because I feel like sometimes they do want to move on from us. I have a very animistic approach to connecting with stones. Liz, did you find a touchstone for today?
I did. I tend to change touchstones maybe once every year or two. I'm still working with rose quartz, which has been my touchstone since last year, and it's one of those stones that I've always avoided because I'm married to my high school boyfriend. What do I need a love spell for, right? Like we're together. It's happened. But actually, Nicholas's book, the Stones of the Goddess, when I was working on the monograph for rose quartz last year for Covina, just a sentence pinged for me. It's not a warm and fuzzy kind of love. It's a stone of tough love. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, what if I think about rose quartz in terms of love for myself, not love for other people? What do I think about when I think of tough love for myself? I think of that best friend feeling. Like, what would your best friend want for you? And that just kind of started my relationship with the stone, and it just continues to be one of my good friends.
Oh, pink quartz, black obsidian, and rhodochrosite. So three of the stones that I talk about in entering Hecate's cave. And it's been quite a process of refining it down just to 13 stones because, when you read the book, Nicholas, you might have like, well, each chapter could have like at least a dozen stones. But I wanted to really, just offer one stone with the idea of creating like an altar or a grid. And that, I think, Liz, is one of the big questions that you get as our stone educator is what do you actually do with stones?
Right. And so, within Covina, we always try to work the stones into like our crafting or into our spell work. I think if you're starting off working with stones, tumbles are a great low cost option. They can go on your altar. You can carry them around with you. You could make small grids with them. We put together the Hekate stones set in the shop. In the tumble form, which I have like kind of splayed out on my altar. So I have all 13 kind of hanging out. And then if I need one, it's right there and quick for me to grab. And of course, towers and chips are also a good lower cost option until you get to my favorite land, which is the ginormous stones that that I love so much.
Yes, those ones that have some girth to them.
Yeah. The ones I go oomph every time I have
Yeah,
to move them around the shop.
yeah,
Larger than life is just the right size, as they say.
yes. So, Nicholas, what would you, because I know in all of your books, you usually start out with a section like on how to work with crystals. So, if someone is listening to the pod and they're completely new to working with stones and crystals, maybe we should start, because I know in your books you do kind of like delineate between what's a stone, what's a crystal, what's a rock. So maybe could you just review that with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I'm a nerd about several things. One of them being language, the other obviously being rocks. So we get to look at the intersection of the two right now. So let's start with this word crystal. Crystal connotes a usually solid substance, but we've got like quasi crystals and other things that bend the rules a little bit. We don't have to worry about them right now, but crystals are solid things that have a regular makeup. It's the same ingredients, inside and out, top to bottom, left to right. And then they will have a regular, repeating, and symmetrical structure. So if we get that, regular composition that repeats and the regular structure that repeats, we end up with a crystal. Minerals are what happens when Mother Nature makes inorganic crystals. So regular composition, regular structure, made by nature, and also made by non-living processes. So, the apatite that's in our teeth and bones is naturally occurring, but it was made by an organic thing, not technically a mineral. Whereas, calcite, quartz, diamond, they're all minerals when they're out there in nature. Rocks, on the other hand, are what happen when minerals come together.
Mm-hmm.
So rocks could be, in a fancy kind of way, defined as an aggregate of one or more minerals, meaning it's not just one single crystal we're looking at, it's lots of them compacted together. They could be really big grains, they could be really tiny grains, too small to see with the naked eye. Another way we might think of it is elements are the building blocks of minerals, which are
Mm-hmm.
crystalline, and then minerals are the building blocks of rocks, which are, polycrystalline. They've got more than one crystal involved in them. And stone is a safe word because
Mm-hmm.
it just means anything from that geosphere, anything hard that the earth made, from some sort of geological activity. Oftentimes, though, especially in academic literature, the word stone is going to imply something influenced by human activity, whether that's a standing stone, a stone tool, a gem stone, but it's not a firm definition. It's a big catch-all.
So could you give us an example of like a mineral?
Yeah, so we could look at beryl, or we could look at calcite, aragonite, hematite, halite, which is, in our
Mm.
salt shaker, sodium chloride. And, rocks, on the other hand, examples of them could be something like limestone, granite, even obsidian is technically a rock because it has variable composition. And the main point of interest when trying to distinguish between a rock versus a mineral, a single mineral like this citrine that I'm holding up, a variety
Mm.
of quartz. This is like a soloist. It's a single voice. It's a very refined or focused kind of energy. A rock, on the other hand, like this limestone I'm holding up, this is going to be like an ensemble. This
Mm-hmm.
is a mixture of voices. Now they could all be the same thing. Like, maybe this citrine is a solo bassoon or a soprano. And then maybe this bit of limestone is like a horn choir, all French horns, but it's a texture of multiple of them because limestone is just one mineral, just calcite through and through. But then you could get something like granite or gabbro, which are lots of different kinds of voices, a richer texture, if you will. So one is not inherently better than the other. In crystal healing, we tend to favor really nice minerals. But there are some things that we work with and have for a very long time that are actually rocks. Jade, lapis lazuli. Those are great examples of things that we consider to be gems or crystals that are really rocks in terms of their makeup.
That's so interesting. So a crystal, let me see if I've got this right. So a crystal technically refers to the structure of a mineral,
Yes.
and it's become just the term that we'll say, "Oh, my crystals," and you're talking about like your quartz, your amethyst, maybe your smoky quartz, maybe your tiger's eye. So it's more of just like a like an umbrella term that we use to describe like our collection of minerals and stones.
Yeah, in a perfect world, given enough space, anything crystalline will be bound by external geometric planes, regular angles and faces. Sometimes, though, we don't get that luxury. So if you look at, for example, something like agate, carnelian, jasper, anything in this kind of chalcedony family, there are crystals in it. We just can't see them with the naked eye. So it is crystalline, but not a single crystal. And, you know, as confusing as this gets, the great news is like the International Mineralogical Association's Commission for New Minerals Nomenclature and Classification, the CMNNC, it's a real thing. They're not going to knock on your door because you use these terms wrong. Like nobody's going to show up and issue you a citation. So call them whatever you like. I think it's just nice to know that these words mean something and that we can imply something energetically or spiritually about it. Um, if we get a takeaway that enriches our practice, wonderful. And if it goes over your head, don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. But I really like your point about like how minerals are like they're more of a single voice. Like you said, they're like a soprano or a tenor. They're a single voice. Whereas like a stone, especially like a composite or an aggregate, um, it can be more like a choir. Still your helpmate and ally. And where I live in the world, so much granite. along the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia. Like we are granite central. Everywhere is granite. Like my well water has a lot of arsenic and manganese in it, and all of those minerals that leach through because they're literally everything here is granite. So I love and hail uh, granite and all of its wonders. And it's interesting. Like for me, living here in Nova Scotia, one of the really amazing things is that we can still find minerals like the agates and amethyst um, in some secret places that I won't divulge. That so going out in the world and going on what I call in the Keeping Your Keys book a correspondence quest and opening yourself up to finding whatever stones, be they rocks or minerals, I think is a really, really wonderful experience of just going out there. And of course, we can do this online too. I mean, Liz, you were just on quite a correspondence quest to find some ethically sourced stones. I think they were special quartz points, weren't they?
I so what I have started to try to do is work with small independent miners, the people who actually like go out themselves and either mine with their tools or find the stones on the ground. I've got a guy who does red jasper in Arizona, and he just walks around and he finds it. But we found the one of the suppliers I work with had like a whole pocket of quartz that she was able to sell to me. And so I offered that specifically to Covina members as kind of a connection, right? Like this whole group of stones grew together and nobody's really ever touched it until the miner found it and she sent it to me, and then we kind of spread it out to our community. And there's just something special about that. I think there's just like an energetic specialness that I've really enjoyed with the pieces that are still here.
And another topic I know Liz gets asked about a lot, and I would bet you might too, Nicholas, is how to like take good care of your stones. And sometimes Liz raises her eyebrows at the things I do with my stones, and then I just remind her that they're my stones and my helpmates, and my stones and I have agreed that this is an appropriate use of their talents. For example, I have a big old rhodochrosite heart in my spell of the year. Um, and Liz worries about that stone, but year after year it doesn't break down in the liquid, which is a mix of alcohol and other witchy things. So what are your like top 3 or so tips for like taking good care of your stones?
On a material side, look up what it's made out of and learn about its hardness. And you can go to places like MINDAT, which is short for Mineral Database, MINDAT.org, to look up any potential cautions or anything else. It's a great resource. But if you have a really soft stone, maybe don't put it in the same pouch with a really hard stone. If you have a polished stone, just know that if it's rubbing up against an unpolished one, it might get scratched up. So, the material side is just know how to take physical care of it, but also just like we require other kinds of care, so do our stones. So we want to pay attention to their spiritual well-being, pay attention to their spiritual hygiene, just like we care about ours. I hope we all care about ours at least. So cleanse them on a schedule that is appropriate for you. The rocks in my office get cleansed less often than the rocks I wear out in the world because, it's out in the world. And they're interacting with things that I have less, we'll say, control over. I don't get to decide who I'm going to meet out there, but I'm usually in charge of who comes into my office and what energies they bring in. So, cleansing regularly, and you get to choose what regular looks like, just like we probably don't all wash the sheets on our bed on the same rhythm or schedule, but we have what is comfortable for us and what is not. So same with our stones. One piece of advice I give beginners is cleanse more often than you think you need to. And I'd say my last little piece of feedback is make space for them. You can use them passively. They can sit in your pocket or around your neck or be in your environment, and they are absolutely doing something. But the more we hold space for the relational side of our work with crystals, the more we get out of that. Maybe that's by sitting down and listening. I know you both have a very animistic approach, and even though my writing looks very left-brained and sciencey, or at least pseudosciencey on the surface, I'm a feral animist on the inside. So much of my personal stuff with rocks comes from sitting down and just letting them lead, which seems odd because the life cycle, if we will, to be kind of poetic about this, of a rock is much slower and longer than the life cycle of any living, breathing, organic, biological thing. But still, there is this ability to let them lead, to let them at least give us subtle cues. Maybe that comes from meditation. Maybe we hear their voice speaking to us. Maybe we just have an inner knowing, and maybe things just feel right. We have no other way to put it than when I hold this emerald, I get an impression of what works and what doesn't for me. The reference books are great places to start. I write them, so naturally I want to encourage people to use them, but there's no substitute for your own relationship with stones. And that's going to spill out into the other things. It's going to help you know when is a good time to cleanse or program or charge, or, when this stone is the right tool for this job, even when the books don't say it is. Because just like a close friend of yours who has a professional resume, has their curriculum vitae that says they're an accountant and has all this training, it doesn't mean they can't help you pack up and move when you're going to a new apartment. It just means that as a stranger, you wouldn't hire them to do that job because that's not what their resume is. So as we get to build those personal relationships with stones, sometimes we come across circumstances where we use something outside the box. Like rhodonite is one of those gems for me. I have rhodonite on and around me at all times, and I work with rhodonite. I won't say I use it. I invite rhodonite to participate in my life in ways that are definitely not in its curriculum vitae. But because we've got that working relationship, it's happy to meet me halfway. A stone I might not know as well, different story. I'm probably going to stick to what I understand to be in its wheelhouse.
Those are some really great points. And when it comes to like stones that go out in the world, like we do a lot of work in Covina and also in entering Hecate's cave. Like we do a lot of work with what's known as internal family systems therapy. And we work with the image of like having a Pyrobolos council. So Pyrobolos is a title of Hekate that means she of fiery counsel, Counsel. And so I see my stones as on my Pyrobolos council. Certain ones are like on at the main table in my interior kind of boardroom. And some of them, their job is to be a protector, like in IFS language. And they go out in the world with me and they work really hard. And some of them are firefighters, and their job is to like make sure when things go wrong, that they help simmer things down and put some water on it. So those stones that go out in the world with me, like I usually I have my rhodochrosite earrings, I have garnet earrings. That's how I kind of adorn myself, or rings. And when something happens when I'm out in the world with them and they get really weary, like any spirit would, of working really hard, then, to cleanse them and to let them rest. Part of cleansing is just letting them rest for me. Sometimes they can get full of like miasma and junk because they're working so hard, like black obsidian, like they're taking stuff in. But some of the stones, I feel like they just get worn out and they need a little rest. Liz, do you have any tips for cleansing? Because I know in Covina and in the Keeping Her Keys book, we do this salt strophalos project that's inspired by like a Zen sand garden, Nicholas, except we use salt and, and draw a strophalos, a wheel inside of it. So I know we just recently did that, and but not all minerals or stones should be put right on salt. So if someone, Liz, made a salt strophalos and they were wondering, like, is that safe to put first of all, salt is stones. So first of all, let's clear that up. So what do you think?
Well, and I actually had somebody ask me this in Covina just a couple days ago, in a message. And so my kind of go-to answer in a lot of these cases is clear glass is your friend. So if you're concerned about putting, a stone in water or you're concerned about leaving your stone outside to cleanse and it's going to rain, because I live in Pacific Northwest and it literally always rains. Putting the stone in a clear glass or under a clear glass, and then putting the, for instance, so put a plate on your strophalos and then put your stones on the plate, like a clear glass plate. Or the way I do it is I have a sheet pan, like one of those clear baking pans that I put outside. I put my stones under the clear baking pan, and then if it rains, no, who cares, right? Because then just the baking pan is getting wet. Or if I want to make crystal water, I always put my crystals inside a bottle inside the water. So I do it with everything, because then I never have to think about it. I never have to have the quandary of, oh, did I go look at Nicholas's book and check the hardness of this before I made my water? No, well, crap, what did I do? So instead, I just do everything the safe way. And that, yes, so sometimes I do make the face at you when you tell me about the things that you do that are not the safe way. But I am a Taurus, and sometimes we need to be very secure and very steady and very sure.
Well, this is why you are the stone educator and I stick to the plants. So I love that. So just so I understand, and everyone engaging with us understands, so you put the glass over it, and so say you're doing like a moon charging or a rain cleansing, and the energy from the rain or the moon, and then the stone itself and its structure and energy, like that glass doesn't block it. It can transmit through the glass.
I mean, in my experience, it still works just as well. Obviously I can't see the energy go through the glass, but I've done it both ways. It doesn't seem to make a significant difference. And I think I love being a witch, but I also recognize that I live in a physical world that has physical rules, and one of those physical rules sometimes is things don't like water. So you kind of have to,
right,
live in both worlds, right? Live in the liminal space of, I accept that there are energies that I can't see and that I can't measure, but I know are there. But also, there is water. It will damage things.
Yeah, water is the enemy of many things.
Yes.
Sad but true.
So cleansing, like under the moon, or you can use charged moon water or the salt strophalos. Nicholas, is there any other kind of like cleansing tips you might have that are fairly easy for our witches to do?
Absolutely. So I've got 3 that I use the most often because they are safe for virtually everything. They are sound, smoke, and breath. So sound doesn't have to be a fancy, expensive singing bowl or beautiful gong or, shaman-made drum. Like, you can use whatever live organic sound you've got, clapping your hands, singing, toning, chanting, whatever that might be. Smoke, insert your favorite cleansing botanical here, whatever is good for you. I do a lot of frankincense because that's my favorite thing to burn. But I also love to use things that I can grow in my garden or that are native to this bioregion that I live in. So that way I'm not necessarily taxing other systems. And then you get to be, an explorer and figure out what you've got near you, which is always a great way to partner with the plant realm and the mineral realm together. And then when it comes to breath, there's a technique that I learned that was in its form as I learned it, taught by a gentleman by the name of Marcel Vogel. He was an R&D guy for IBM for almost 3 decades, and then left to study psychic phenomena, spiritual healing, and crystal healing in particular. He never intended to, it just happened. But he had this breathing technique where you kind of create a short and sharp pulse of air through the nose. It doesn't look exciting from far away. It's just a little pulse like this. And when we do this, he measured that you actually ionize the breath, you generate the teeniest electrical charge, but you're coupling it with a visualization that directs that energy, that sets the tone for that being cleansing. And then you don't have to worry about whether it's a full moon, whether something's going to dissolve in water, be damaged by salt, fade in the sunlight. You don't have to remember to have your singing bowl, your bowl of salt, your water with you, you always have your breath. And if you don't have your breath, like a dirty crystal, that's not your problem right now, right? So the beautiful thing about breath is that it is always with us. And how much of our magic can we tie to our breath? How much can we observe that relationship between the two anyway? So I really enjoy that, but I also recognize that's great for an intentional one-on-one kind of cleanse. If I want to cleanse my whole office, I'm not going to pick up every rock on every shelf and breathe intentionally on it individually, because I'll keel over before I get there. It'll just never happen. So that's why I like having more passive things like smoke or sound that are good for large swaths of crystals all at once.
I love smoke. It's one of my favorite ones, and as well as sound. I'm really inspired by like the myths around like Circe and Medea singing their spells to life. So I love to sing to my plants and my stones, and just to attune with them as well, like to attune my own frequency, so they get to know me as well. Um, and I think that's the next thing I'd like to talk about is like, we've both of us, well, all three of us have mentioned, that it goes beyond like working with stones or connecting with stones, that certainly like if you have your own personal touchstones, like it's a deep relationship that you build over time. And like any relationship, we want to tend it, we want it to be mutually beneficial, we want to trust ourselves and trust our relationship partner. In this case, it's our stone. And there's so much into building this relationship. And one of the things it's so amazing about the world that we live in, because of the internet, we can like purchase stones, just about any stone we want, and we can have hundreds and hundreds of them. And then it's like it's impossible to be close to hundreds and hundreds of anybody. So like, what would you say? I want to ask Liz this because I think Liz has a really good take on this. So, how, as someone, because you are literally surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of stones all the time.
Yes, I am.
So, how do you kind of manage the fact that you've got all these spirits around you all the time, and they're emanating things like they do, and like having like your own personal coterie or collection of helpmates that you really have that deep relationship with. So how do you navigate that?
Well, I think so for my stone philosophy basically encompasses like 3 levels of connection. So, and they're not judgment levels. It's not about like getting you certainly don't want everything to get to this deepest level. But the first level is just like, hey, it's pretty. I want it. There's something that just pings for me about this stone, and I see it and I want it in my environment. And maybe it's not something I ever actually actively work with. There might still be that passive energy that's happening in my space, but really the focus of why I wanted it is just because I liked it. There's something about it I like. And perhaps that stone will end up being a deeper connection in the future, but for right now, I just like it. And then the second level is really where we are making use of the energies of the stone, but have not yet kind of reciprocated the relationship. So this is really where we're talking about like spell work. If I buy chips to put in a spell bag, or I put a tumble somewhere, in a poppet, that kind of situation. So, and this is where I think Nicholas's books are really great. Other references, I always tell people to go with Nicholas's books, but of course there are other references as well that maybe have more magical associations as well. But that's where you're going to maybe look it up in the book and say, okay, for this spell, I need this thing, right? We're looking for a targeted action. But the third level, which is the level I think we're talking about when we're at Touchstones, is where we're really having a reciprocal relationship with the stone. So it's not just I am using the energies of the stone, but I'm also, the way I think of it, I'm doing the things the stone is asking of me to kind of blend my energies, change my vibration to more match the stone. So, and I was thinking about Black Obsidian because kind of my thoughts about this kind of happened in Covina while we were working with Black Obsidian. So it's the example that's in my brain. When you reach that kind of third level with Black Obsidian, it's providing you with a safe space, right? but it's also asking you to use that safe space to do other things, to look inside yourself, to do the shadow work, maybe to do divination. And I think it's when we reach that third level that's when those personal correspondences can really happen, right? Because we've matched ourselves so well with the stone that it perhaps opens up the possibility that really you can use the stone to do anything, because the thing that you needed is the thing that the stone had. And so it opens up a world of possibilities, right? So going back to Black Obsidian, if I needed this safe space and I have the safe space, well, perhaps now I feel safe to bring more love into my life, or I feel safe to be proactive and go be, try to bring more abundance in my life, those kind of situations. So I very intentionally limit the number of stones that I try to have that deepest level relationship with, because one, like you said, you're not going to have a million close friends. You shouldn't attempt to have a million close stone friends either. And I also, so in terms of my personal touchstones, that's how I work. But I also make conscious choices about the stones that I do bring into the shop. I do my best to source ethically so that I'm limiting perhaps negative energies. There are certain things I just don't buy because I don't want their energy in my house. My personal irritation is that famous baked obsidian or baked citrine, the fake citrine, baked amethyst, the million different things people are calling it right now. I don't like that. I don't, even if I knew all of the customers and myself knew exactly what it was, it still feels deceptive to me. So I won't have it in my house because I run the store out of my house. And so I don't have it in the shop. So there are a few things that I just like actively will not engage with because I don't want their energies in my space. But otherwise, I've never had my stones fight, right? Like there's some little pings, like, weird energy spots. Maybe I'll decide, okay, you need to maybe move over to this shelf for today. Something is weird, vibing, whatever. But in general, this is just like a happy little building that is full of crystals. and I like sitting in the middle of it. It's my little crystal cave. It's fun.
I love that. So the first level would be like, it's an object, a beautiful object.
But I don't want to, again, I want to make sure that doesn't sound dismissive, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with something being a beautiful object. And there's also nothing wrong with realizing or kind of following that intuition of, for some reason, this thing is calling to me. Maybe the thing is calling to me because it's pretty, or maybe in 6 months, I'm going to figure out it has exactly the energy that I needed this whole time, and I'm ready to start the relationship with it.
Well, I mean, beautiful objects, this is why I could never to me, it makes no sense to me when people are critical of like the witch aesthetic. And, because it's like, well, beauty is so important and so magical. So a beautiful object is magical in and of itself. To have a beautiful stone in our space that just to see it brightens us a little bit. Maybe, helps us just seeing the beauty, helps us feel more content and less stressed. I think that's amazing. So I didn't think you were dismissive at all of calling it a beautiful object. And then the second, correspondences, which is so important in our practice, which is working with, like you said, in some instances, we're going to Nicholas's books and like referencing and saying like, this is my intention, and what stones might Nicholas be suggesting that map onto what I want to do. The kind of the other end is, these are the stones I have, and how can I adapt my working based on what's in Nicholas's books to achieve my attention. So there's kind of the two ways you can go at them with correspondences, and then working with them, like you said, to really have them as helpmates. And I love what you said about obsidian. Obsidian's job, one of obsidian's tasks is to hold space and create space and be that liminal in between zone. So, and then like as you develop that relationship, it's almost like you have a friend who is really good at this, and you go to them for their help because you know that's their skill set, and you could go to them for a variety of things. So I really just, I love how you kind of organize that. And, hail beauty. And let's not be critical of people who love beauty. And let's let ourselves love crystals as gorgeous objects. I mean, that's part of why I love rhodochrosite so much. I remember when I first saw it years ago, I was like, now there's a stone I could sink my heart into. Because the colors of rhodo, I love the brown, the white, the pink, the black, the gray. I was just like, I love it. I love how it's not overly organized. And personally for me, I like that it's not sparkly. I'm not a big fan of the sparkly. I'm not diminishing the sparkly in any way, but Liz, my stone collection, and I have a lot of raw specimens, and I have very few that are kind of like what you might think of when you think of a crystal as something that's very like from a geode and super sparkly. I don't think I have anything like that, do I?
You might have maybe some amethyst pieces that are like, you have that amethyst cave that's not unsparkly if you put it in your
I love
case.
that amethyst cave. Nicholas, you want to see this amethyst cave?
It's pretty hot.
So this is Nova Scotia amethyst. So it's very pale, it's very mauve. It doesn't come through in Zoom really well. Isn't that beautiful?
It is. I could just journey right in.
So all that was done to it by the person who found it, they just polished the bottom, and the rest of it is just kind of as they chipped it off. So it's even like the whole kind of specimen except for the bottom. It's my beloved. I know I say I love rhodochrosite, but we have conversations every day, and it's never too far from me. And I have a piece of local smoky quartz that you can probably see behind the malachite. Those are like my two besties, along with just rhodochrosite in general. Oh, this is a really good conversation, and I'm learning a lot and seeing things in a new way. What really fascinates me, like all of your reference books are amazing, Nicholas, and thank you for doing all that research. I really love how you merge the scientific properties of the stones with the spiritual properties of the stones. And something that's long fascinated me, although, plants would be more of my area of expertise than stones, and I've kind of always left the stones to people like you and Liz, and know quite a bit about them, but the plants have kind of always been my first area of knowledge. But with the plants, it's interesting because there are historical lineages we can trace back to kind of find, how they became associated with what Jupiter, or how they became associated with Aries, and what their spiritual properties are. There's often like that lineage that goes back, to the ancient Greeks, the Egyptians, and other cultures, and even can draw from like traditional Chinese medicine and so on. There is this, there's a plethora of sources that give this really long history to plants. And I'm curious to know, like, is there that for crystals and stones?
Absolutely. So some of the earliest writing that we can consider to be as close to a book as possible for being written on clay and stone is actually a lapidary text. It's a catalog of gems in cuneiform writing, and it's a listing of them, notes about sourcing and economical value, and in some cases about their magical or medicinal properties. So some of the earliest like proto book, if you will, is about rocks. We have been using rocks and minerals since before Homo sapiens. There's archaeological evidence that comes from China, from outside Beijing, a discovery that in the early 20th century they called the Peking man, and this individual is pre-Homo sapiens, and estimates on the age range of these remains are somewhere between like 250 to 450,000 years, so a quarter to almost a half a million years ago. And this hominid was buried with an assortment of quartz crystals, all perfect, all carefully wrapped and placed with the remains, none of them from the area where those remains are found. So they came from other places. They had to have been collected, traded, transmitted across great distances to get to where they are. So we have a really long history of working with quartz specifically, but also of rock and gem of all ages. So I would say, the idea of corresponding them to the celestial bodies and then to other kinds of correspondences, we certainly see go back to the origins of astral magic, the origins of magic as we think of it in places like Mesopotamia, Babylon, Sumer. So we've got early writings that connect gems to the celestial bodies, and then in later iterations, when the shift from planets to the constellations was important, then we see them being transferred onto the template of the signs of the zodiac. As we get into the kind of classical Greek period, we're also going to see that they are associated with the mythic figures and their archetypes that, the constellations, the planets were named after, which, kind of begins this whole fabric of our modern system of crystal correspondences. Certainly, there are a lot of things that the ancients knew and loved that are classified very differently to how we would today. My beloved emerald, the word emerald comes from Greek, smaragdos, which just means a green stone. So, this chromium-rich beryl is smaragdos, but a green chalcedony could be smaragdos. A piece of dioptase, not that they knew it in the ancient world, but if they did, that would also be smaragdos. So how we, draw the line, how we classify things is more nuanced, is more sophisticated, is more accurate than it once was. And that's why, color correspondences are really good entry points for people, even if statistically speaking, from a chemical perspective, in many cases, color is very, very much a minor contributor to a crystal's energy and makeup. It is an important psychological tool. We relate to color. Color is one of those things that is a pervasive part of human experience. And although the cultural narrative around it might change from era or location, it's still meaningful to us. So we kind of start there. But yeah, there's a really long, sophisticated chain of the history of crystal use. One of my hopes one day is to write a really definitive history book on crystals, going back to the earliest prehistorical periods. I don't know how I can get that into one volume successfully, and I don't know how I can sell a publisher on 2 volumes of it. But I've taught a couple of classes in different iterations, a shorter version, a longer version, that really kind of focused on the history of lapidary medicine as we know it. There's a brilliant academic by the name of Nicholas E. Harris who is working on a book, but has published papers on this concept of lapidary medicine. One of her areas of expertise is the history of medicine, period. But she coined this term lapidary medicine to describe the way that geopharmaceuticals have been applied, whether that is in the kind of Greco-Roman period as magical gems being a category of objects, not just the use of gems magically, but they represent non-Homeric, non-Olympic forms of magical, spiritual, religious thought that often blend things from the far reaches of those empires and unite them and take these things that might be radically different symbol sets and unite them for a purpose. And those are often therapeutic. Still magical, but very much therapeutic. And we look at traditional medicines like the medicine practiced in the Himalayas, in China, in any indigenous culture, and there are uses for rocks, minerals, gemstones, clays, soils, ochre. Like, it's all there. So there's a really, really long stream of thought that connects our spiritual practice in the modern world to the very foundational part of humans and the earth. And that's really what it is, right? Even if we look at so many epistemologies out there that describe the origin of the human race, we are made of earth, we are made of clay, we are shaped from the body of the planet herself.
It's so true. We are comprised of minerals.
Yeah.
And we often, I start every day with taking supplements, taking different minerals. So, when you talk about lapidary medicine, that's the first thing I thought about, myself in the morning with my little arrangement of all of the different supplements I take. And so I never really thought of it that way before. So thank you for putting that together for me. And Nicholas, you brought up one of my favorite subjects. Liz is laughing because Liz knows what you touched upon, which are those magical gems from the areas around the ancient Mediterranean, specifically, is what I know quite a bit about. I love these. I am intrigued. They enchant me. I have traveled to many a museum around the world with the express purpose that they have magical gems there. So, I'll be at the big museum and everyone else wants to see the dinosaurs or the statues. And I'm like, no, no, I just need to go and see the magical gems. I am, they, it's almost like, is it a past life thing? Like, what is going on with me in these magical gems? And I'll link to the Campbell Bonner Magical Gem database in the show notes in case anyone else wants to catch my particular fervor that I have for these magical gems. Um, and it's interesting because where my writing focuses on Hekate, I think I first came into them and then I discovered that there's many that are known to exist today that have Hecate on them. And like you raised the thing is how they were, like you said, non-Homeric, non-Orphic, kind of outside of like what you might think of the kind of traditional magical religious practices of more mainstream societies during the classical kind of period. Um, and I love how you can feel in them that they were for healing, whether it was betrayal, some of the, seek vengeance against someone who broke your heart, or to bring healing for a child, or to help you find a new job, or, whatever their purposes were. I am just completely enchanted by them and the iconography and the way they, for me, really, I know they're 2,000 years old, some newer, some older, but for me, it's like they really um, are simpatico with how I practice magic today because they'll be okay, we'll have Hecate on here with her torches and traditional symbols and so on, but on the back of it we'll put the good shepherd, Jesus. um, and then we'll add other things that perhaps Hecate isn't, mainstream Hecate at that time wouldn't be associated with, and how they'll have like Apollo, and I am enchanted by these magical gems and like you said, lapidary medicine. I think I've read some of her papers, because I do, like, kind of one of my private passion projects is just to understand how stones would have been, like what those magical gems with Hecate on them, what they would have meant to the person who created them, and then whether the person who created them used them for themselves or they were for someone else. Like, the social kind of anthropology around what those magical gems meant is something that it's definitely like one of my favorite areas. I don't know if I'll ever put it in a book because, like you said about writing about the history of stones, it's like writing about the history of these magical gems. There's so many layers to it. There's like I mentioned, the anthropology aspect of it. There's the culture of the time and all of the other things that kind of were involved in creating these little magical gems.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. When I was a teenager electing my focus academically, if I'd known that there would become fields like archaeogemology, like that's a real thing people could study, my life might have taken a very different trajectory. And there's no reason that might still not happen at some point, but there are some really fascinating studies that have been published on the topic of these artifacts.
Mhm.
And the thing that I find so endearing is that they're so enduring.
Mhm.
Um, they have their classical makeup, the genesis of them and the use of them, and then the same artifacts, not just the same style, but the exact same things were recycled over and over and over again, traded far and wide. And that's why they're in museums all over the world. They've been reset into jewelry by different people who attributed new meanings to them. So we see things move from that classical period into, eventually the medieval, when there was a big renaissance of them, and even into like the early modern period. These things persisted, and it's just so fascinating to me. I just got another book for my collection that is a study on magical gems, and I've got a small number of them now. I'm going to add some more, but yeah, it's such a fascinating topic.
It is such a fascinating topic. And in case you don't know what these magical gems are, so they are small stones, and they have carvings in them, much the same way we might make like a something with a sigil today, or do some kind of talisman today. And that kind of links us to, like, we're going to be making, like in Covina, a version of a magical gem, just a simple. Liz, what stone are we using again?
We're using rainbow moonstones.
Rainbow moonstone. And then just, in the spirit of a magical gem, and then putting a sigil and symbols on the stone and putting it in a little spell bag, Nicholas, like they probably would have back then, just in the spirit. And it's a way to honor, like, those ancient practitioners of this kind of, like, holistic lapidary, because the honoring the magical aspects, but also, like, the physiological properties of the stones. So it's so beautiful. And then you have Stones of the Goddess, where I remember when I first read it, I was like, I never thought of that before. But I had many moments like that when I was first reading it. But the whole thing, that many of the artifacts, like the statues of Hekate and other goddesses, they're stone. So it makes so much sense that the goddess is, of course, deeply associated with stone, because many of her ancient artifacts were carved in stone, which may be slightly less common today, I think, to have a stone statue or icon of a deity on your altar. Um, so I am curious about, like, what your inspiration was for writing Stones of the Goddess.
So this is a project that is very near and dear to my heart. I had a surprising amount of trepidation releasing it to the world because I was so excited about it, but it was in some ways so deeply personal. And also, like, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm a cis guy writing about the divine feminine, although I identify as queer and embrace my own femininity in a lot of ways. There's still, it's a funny world we live in, and I just want to make sure I do my best. And I hope that my tools are good enough for others, and they might not be. And occasionally I've gotten the feedback that they weren't, and that's fine. But this project was born because of my own ongoing work with the goddess in her many guises and her many forms. And it is hard not to contemplate the history of the divine feminine in a kind of universal approach. I know that has its own issues as well, but to not see how deeply entrenched it is with the heart and soul of the planet. And it's in our language, it's in our sciences. I mean, the word matter comes from mater, mother.
Right.
Word matrix, the substrate in which rocks and minerals form, is Latin for womb. We have mountains named after certain bits of anatomy. We have so many ways that we see the divine feminine deeply embodied in the planet and the rocks and minerals that comprise her, that I couldn't not write this book. I saw the little things, and it was that little tap on the shoulder from spirit, and I was like, okay, great, I'll write that down, but I'm working on something. I got to do this other thing. I've never done that other thing. It's finally under contract, and I've made a lot of progress on it in the last couple of years, but I still never finished it. This was 2000, maybe 17 or so, 2017, 2018. I started something else, and then started kind of seeing these correlations, these correspondences. I'm like, okay, I'll make a chart, just crystals that are connected to different divine feminine figures, goddesses, saints, heroines, and the like. And that'll be enough to kind of put it on paper and go the other direction and finish what I want to finish. And that didn't happen that way, and that's fine. But it became this act of devotion for me. Particularly the editing bit. I'm not super fond of the editing side of writing a book, for a lot of reasons, but I really love my editor, and I love the relationship that we have. So, the fine tuning of it um, is something that is hard to do when there's all the red on the page, and my brain doesn't like the noise of that. So that initial edited draft is always hard. So I would go to my altar, which in that home was right beside my desk. It is now as well. There's just one shelf in between us. So, but it was like at arm's length, and I would light a candle, and I would devote the work I was going to do, meaningful, important work, but the nitty gritty stuff that I might not enjoy as much. And I made that my devotion to the goddess, and I just kind of let that be my guiding light. And there's this wonderful body of myth that we find across the world that either gives us myths about particular gemstones associated with particular figures, maybe amethyst, who is the nymph escaping Bacchus Dionysus, who is transformed to stone by Diana or Artemis, depending on which version we're reading. Or we could look at Uminia, the great earth mother in South America, who is embodied as a larger than life emerald, who, of course, to keep her safe, the Spanish conquistadores, the colonizers, kept this emerald in their safekeeping to make sure nothing would befall it, right? And so we've never seen this emerald ever since, right? And just so many myths like that connect specific rocks, minerals, gemstones with specific goddess figures, that I really enjoyed following those threads and uniting them with our modern day approach, because I don't live in ancient Greece. I don't live in the Ptolemaic period of Egypt. I don't live in 17th century Japan. I live here, and we have a wealth of mineral treasures that our antecedents didn't have because of our ability to mine and also classify them more specifically than we ever could. So I wanted to make sure that book also has some modern day rocks and gems and modern day associations, because that's the world we live in. And I want this to kind of bring us from the ancient world to today, and hopefully, with that level of continuity, carry us forward, and people will continue to make their own associations and build that relationship in their everyday lives.
That's so beautiful. And I love, like, you can feel that book is devoted to the divine feminine. Many of your books are very like reference based, but Stones of the Goddess, it really is like an offering um, to her and all of her faces and all of her stories. And, something that always pings for me in thinking about different stories from mythology around the world is that, like you brought up, being turned to stone to kind of like escape the male gaze or male aggression. And I've often thought about that, it's because it's a very, being turned into an animal still leaves you vulnerable, or a plant. But if you're turned into stone, it's, yes, in a sense, you may like look at that story and think, well, oh, well, she must have lost her consciousness and she lost her humanity. But when I look at it, I see it like, oh, but she became a different type of consciousness. And this, because stones are so durable and reliable and can't be messed with, that in a way it was like her salvation from kind of like what was being done to her. So I've always found that interesting, this business of being turned into pillar of salt or stone, or and why stone has been so important. Like I'm thinking about like Caliac and her stones in her apron. So like this deep connection between the sacred feminine and stones, from everyday rocks like the Caliac throwing rocks to make mountains, to like you said, the emeralds. Like what happened to that emerald? So it's just so intriguing, and like you so brilliantly pointed out, like Mater, that means mother. And to the ancients, when they, in Latin, like when these words were being first like created, I guess, um, that they were choosing these words that were really evocative of the feminine in many different examples when it comes to like geology and in lapidary and all that. And it's really always been something that fascinates me. And I just want to thank you for bringing that into our consciousness as we wrap up our time together. We didn't even have time to get into the 7 archetypal stones, Nicholas. Maybe sometime you can come back and we can talk about stones as archetypes. I know that would be really interesting because that's kind of how I tend to see them.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Well, this has been great, Liz. Thanks for getting up early, you West Coaster, you, and
Thanks for
hanging out with
having
us
me.
today. Hanging out with us today. If you are interested in learning more about Nicholas's work, you can go to theluminouspearl.com to purchase supplies and peruse what Liz has available in her shop. It's materiamagikeia.com. And as always, if you want to learn more about what I'm up to, including the upcoming Camp Hekate this summer, you can go to keepingherkeys.com. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.